If you look at the survey evidence, far more people in the British Social Attitudes poll, a survey that's taken, are now very interested in politics than was ever the case before. We can expect, I think, pretty high turnout, not just because people are motivated, but because we have a new register, so we're counting fewer dead people now, so the proportion is going to be higher, naturally. So I think people are motivated by Brexit. I mean, the problem is, I think, there are the prospectus, as Bronwyn hinted at this, that they're being offered aren't altogether straightforward or necessarily honest. On the point about, and I'll come on to the manifestos in a minute, but on the point about whether or not this is a Brexit election, I suppose the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating. Now, 2017 was meant to be a Brexit election, but if you dig into the numbers, then actually social class, as ever, was the primary driver of how people voted, with wrinkles. And we all know the wrinkles. You know, you had to say things you never thought you'd say, like, you know, the Tories win Stoke, or Labour win Kensington. So there was a Brexit impact, but it was quite limited. And what we don't know this time, and I'll come back to this in a minute because it matters, is whether or not new Brexit coalitions will take shape, whether in particular the Tories come to power on the back of a Brexit coalition that might win the majority, but might actually make it very, very hard for them to govern. Because creating a set of economic policies for that Brexit coalition is going to be challenging, to say the least. But on the manifestos, if I start with Labour, I mean, the Labour offer is, on the surface, quite simple. We're going to go to Brussels, we're going to renegotiate the deal, we're going to come back, we're going to have a referendum, and as Bronwyn says, that'll take us 6 months, and then we'll move on to other things. Now, there are holes in this, I mean, not least in the fact that it's far from clear what Jeremy Corbyn is going to ask for in Brussels. There are some wonderfully ambiguous phrases in the manifesto. Joint UK-EU trade deals is one such phrase. If by joint the Labour Party mean the EU will negotiate them and we will have to apply them, then I think the EU could probably live with that. If by joint the Labour Party means we're going to get a real say over them, I suspect Brussels might turn around and say, actually, no. So that's one issue where there's going to be a little bit of ambiguity. And the other is on the notion of alignment with the single market. What Labour don't say is how much. So you can align with the single, you could claim that Mrs May's deal involved alignment with the single market. You could equally say that Norway aligns with the single market, but between the two there is a gulf. So the scale of ambition is very, very unclear. And of course, when it comes to the political practicalities of the Labour position, there's very little escaping from the fact that even were Jeremy Corbyn to pull this trick off, to go to Brussels, renegotiate a deal, and there are reasons, I think, to wonder whether he'll get that far, which I'll come back to in a sec. But he will come back and then find a significant amount of his own cabinet, of his own parliamentary party, of his own party membership, and of his own electorate will then go and campaign against what he's just done, which at a minimum is not a good look. I mean, you know, think back to 2016. It's not a good look for a prime minister to have his deal trashed by his own party. So there's instability inherent in that. Anyway, so you know there are issues around what Labour is offering. I personally think it'll be very, very hard for a minority Labour government, because that is the only sort of Labour government we're going to have, to get the necessary legislation through Parliament. My hunch is, as they try to do this and run into the choppy waters of a Lib Dem party, half of whose MPs will be people who left in order that Jeremy Corbyn didn't become Prime Minister, of an SNP that has its own list of demands, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we weren't to have another election before we got anywhere near a referendum, but we'll see what happens. I was going to save that till last, actually. We turn to the Tories. I mean, there are three things that concern me about the Tory manifesto, I suppose. Well, one thing that doesn't concern me is I would say that if the Conservatives come back with a majority of one, they will get Brexit done by the end of January, because I'm pretty certain that no Conservative MP returned in this election will vote against any Brexit motion in the House of Commons until we've left. So I think they only need a very, very small majority to get us over that line. Then, going back to one of the things I said earlier, if you imagine a Tory party in Parliament that involves not just traditional Tory MPs, but, you know, a Tory MP for, I can hardly say this out loud, a Tory MP for Wakefield, for Bolsover, for West Bromwich, for Walsall, all those people, once they've been elected and got over the sort of warm glow, will be thinking, hang on a sec, the Prime Minister's plan for Brexit is to make our economic relationship with the European Union so thin that a significant number of my constituents might lose their jobs before I'm up for re-election. Those pressures will be real inside the Parliamentary Conservative Party, I think, quite quickly. So in a sense, the more successful Boris Johnson's electoral strategy is, the harder it will be to deliver the sort of Brexit he's been promising, because he might face the threat of dissension in his own ranks. But the three things that worry me about what the Tories are offering is, firstly, as Bronwyn said, this notion that we can negotiate a trade deal by the end of next year. I don't think the EU is going to give us an easy ride. I think even if we say something simple like tariff-free on goods, the French will say, well, they might say fish, and the Spanish might phrase Gibraltar, but the French will also say level playing field, because you're not having access to our market, you're too big, you're too close, you can't have that sort of deal without guarantees, okay? Secondly, bear in mind the politics of trade. Free trade isn't very popular in Europe as a whole at the moment, politically speaking. Look at the composition of the European Parliament. And this is the first ever trade negotiation whose sole intention is to make trade harder, okay? And what that means is there are very few things you can sell at home as wins. And I suspect that politically getting this kind of deal over the line in the 27, not to mention Wallonia and the regional parliaments where it might have to go, will be a struggle. So the second problem with the Tories is they say we're not going to extend transition, which opens the real prospect that at the end of next year we face a World Trade Organization exit. Well, of course, you know, you might quite rightly say, well, the Prime Minister has said things and done something different before, so maybe he'll do that again, maybe he will, but I think it will be difficult. It's there in black and white in the manifesto. And the final thing, and I'll stop here about the Conservative manifesto that troubles me, is the Conservative Party is going for a far looser relationship with the European Union than even that Mrs. May was after, okay? Which means that the economic implications and the necessary adjustments are going to be significantly greater than they would have been in the case of Mrs. May's deal. Yet, nowhere in the manifesto is this recognised. And I would have preferred, if you're committed to doing Brexit, be honest about it and say, we're doing Brexit and it's going to mean some issues for the economy. This is our plan to address them, rather than simply ignoring them and carrying on as normal as if everything would be fine regardless of the Brexit outcome.
I think there's a lot of things that we might have preferred about a lot of things, but particularly about the last couple of years. Just putting you on the spot, because there's a question from online that does just that. What is harder to do? Negotiate the future relationship within a year, or negotiate a new withdrawal agreement and hold a referendum within 6 months? If you're just kind of, you know, on the implausibometer, you know, which one is kind of off the scale and which one is, or are they both?
Well, they're not, neither's easy. The trade, I mean, remember, it's not just the trade deal. It depends on the scale of our ambitions. I mean, one of the striking omission from the Tory manifesto is any mention at all of security cooperation with the European Union, and let issues around military cooperation, around data sharing, for police collaboration are incredibly important. If you want to do all of that, and you want to do it well, you're not going to do it in a year. So negotiating a good, broad, thorough relationship with our nearest and largest trading partner is not going to take a year, it's going to take longer.